Hello everyone and welcome back to Fly From Home. It is Kitty back here again with another aircraft review for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and we are back here with the Just Flight Piper Warrior PA-28 161 Warrior 2, which is an aircraft which I did a first impressions video on a couple of weeks ago, just when Just Flight gave us a pre-release version to look at. Now, this is now fully available to the general public. It was released a couple of days ago, and we have the full release version here in the hangar, and we're going to do a full in-depth review of it. Now, before we get started, just a quick warning. For those of you who haven't seen these videos from this channel before, this is not going to be a 5-minute jump in the aeroplane, fly around and say, yep, seems about right, you should go out and buy it type review. This is not a quick review. This is certainly going to be a full in-depth with all the numbers. It is going to take quite a long time. It is a long form review. So if you're not on board for that kind of thing, please, here's the exit in the most polite sense. Save yourself the trouble. For those of you who don't want to sit through all the different segments of this video, there are going to be timestamps below, and the format of this video is going to go as such. So as usual, for those of you familiar, you will know what we do on this channel, but for those of you who are new, I'll just outline it. So I'm going to talk about the real aircraft and the history of the real aircraft for a little bit. I'm going to have a look at the external model of the aircraft and the internal model and all the different liveries which Just Flight have been kind enough to include with this aeroplane. And then we're going to jump into the simulator and we're going to do a full test flight of the aircraft, which is going to be in control conditions, and compare the performance of the aircraft to real-world pilots operating handbook figures. We're then going to land the aircraft and come to some kind of conclusion, which of course is going to be purely based on my own experience and my own views, and may not agree with anything that you have to say about this aeroplane. So get those disclaimers out early. So, without further delay, let's crack on and start with the first part of the video. So that is going to be a little word about the history of the aeroplane. So, the Piper Warrior was an aircraft which was originally introduced by Piper in 1961, and the original concept of this aeroplane was as a cheaper, more simple alternative to the PA-24 Comanche, which is a much bigger 6-cylinder retractable gear, more of a sort of rival to the Arrow, but even more so, I'd say it's a bit more high performance than the Arrow. Really lovely aeroplane, actually, but anyway, I'm not going to digress too much. So this aircraft was first produced in 1961. The 1961 version looked quite a bit different to this, different cowling, different wings, different cockpit, but it was still essentially the same thing underneath the skin, slightly different performance characteristics as well, and a different engine. This particular version came out in 1977, and it featured a slightly longer fuselage, I think about a 5-inch fuselage stretch. You've got the little third window, you can see on the fuselage here. So this was something which was only on the Arrow and the Archer, I believe, before the Warrior 2 came out. The Warrior before that only had 2 windows, so it's quite easy to identify the older aircraft. Well, they weren't called Warriors, they were just called Cherokees. I'm getting my words mixed up here. But the Warrior 2 was the first one to introduce this longer fuselage. And also, if I have a look in the movable camera here, it introduced a longer tapered wing. So the original Cherokee had a much shorter wing called sometimes the Hershey bar wing. I'll just stick a picture of it on the screen for you so you can see the difference between the two. So the Hershey bar wing was great in that it was quite good in the cruise. However, at lower airspeed, you could end up with quite a high nose attitude to maintain altitude, which is bad for forward visibility. And also, it resulted in sort of relatively mushy low-speed handling characteristics. Anyone who's flown an old Cherokee or indeed an Arrow 1 or 2 will be familiar with these kinds of handling characteristics. I spend most of my time in my current career flying around in an Arrow 2, which has got little stubby wings, so I'm quite familiar with how sort of how unpleasant that can be. It's not that unpleasant, but you know what I mean. this longer wing kind of remedied a lot of that. However, it's also kind of added a little bit more drag in the cruise, so you can sometimes find aircraft fitted with this long wing that are a little bit slower in the cruise than the shorter wing aircraft. Now, this aircraft is actually still in production today, so 1977 all the way through to today, still in production with the new Piper Aircraft Company, which took over from original Piper after the original Piper went bankrupt in the 90s, I believe it was. So you can still go out and buy one of these. They look slightly different these days. It's got a slightly different cowling with little round air intakes, which is supposed to be more aerodynamic and give the aircraft a little bit extra speed. It's also available with, I believe, G500 avionics, so it's got fancy avionics fit for all of you glass panel enthusiasts out there. Mostly geared towards being sold to flying schools. They have quite a few large orders from big commercial flying schools all the way around the world. So still a very popular aircraft. You still see lots of them knocking around. And indeed, it is an aircraft which I'm sure all of you on the channel who are pilots in real life will have come across at some point, I'm sure. It's almost impossible to go to a GA airfield and not run into one of these, literally or figuratively. And they are very, very good training aeroplanes. They're very, very benign. They fly around at a good sort of speed for a student to get a handle on the aircraft. You don't want to be sort of zipping around 160 knots when you're just doing your PPL and getting used to things. The one downside I'd say as a flying instructor that I don't like about this aircraft, certainly for teaching initial PPL, is the visibility is a little bit poor. These windows are quite small out the side, so it can be a little bit stressful, certainly in busy traffic situations, looking out for traffic. But other than that, fantastic airplane and a great training tool. Now, my own experience with this airplane, I learned to fly on this aircraft back in about 2009. I'd already had about sort of 10 or 15 hours on Cessna 152s, but other than that, all of my initial training was done on one of these. Indeed, it was a Warrior, well, a Warrior 3, I believe. I flew for a lot of it, but the difference is very, very minimal. It's just the new Piper aeroplane company after 2000 started calling it the Warrior 3. It's got a slightly nicer cockpit, I guess. But other than that, no difference. So yeah, aeroplane which holds a special place in my heart. I've got about 250 hours. I checked my logbook the other day. About 250 hours in this aircraft total, which is a reasonable amount, and I think probably qualifies me to review this aircraft for Flight Simulator, I would say, anyway. I'm sure you're all going to say I'm an idiot and I should go home, but but I'm not going to listen. Okay, so that's the real aircraft. So let's take a look at how good a job Just Flight have done of modelling this thing in the simulator. Now, Just Flight's external models are very, very good. If you've looked at any of their other products, like the Arrow, or the two, or rather three Arrows that they've brought out for Microsoft Flight Simulator so far. They have slightly sort of weathered up looks, but they are very, very accurate in terms of all of the screws and hinges, bolts and bits and pieces are all exactly where they are in the real aeroplane. However, the textures are sometimes a little bit less high fidelity than such as Coronado produces, or indeed the default aircraft which come with Microsoft Flight Simulator. This aircraft, I believe, is Just Flight's best effort to date. I think the textures are very, very sharp and almost undiscernible from the default aircraft, shall we say. You can get extremely close to these textures and they still hold up. You can get very, very close to the warning just above the gascolator drain just there at the side of the engine cowling, and you can read that full warning. In fact, I'll probably do that for you. So the textures are incredibly good. They've got weathering, and this is really, for anyone familiar with Warriors, they know that this little bit of the cowling here is always kind of streaked with dirt from the inside of the cowling of the aircraft's been flown through, a little bit of moisture, a bit of cloud, something like that. Moisture gets into the air intake here, picks up dirt in here, and then comes out of this gap here and leaves these sort of black streaky marks. So they've obviously done an awful lot of work making sure this airplane looks absolutely spot on with the real one. We've got the stickers on the prop and all sorts of stuff like that. And if you come around the back here, you can see, I can't really see that well. In fact, I'll probably have to show you in the simulator, but all these little screws here, these little flathead screws with washers around them, all in the right place. So all of you rivet counters can get in there and have a really good look at all this and match it up to what the real aircraft has, and I believe you will not be disappointed. So yeah, very, very good standard of external model. While we're out here, let's have a look at all the different liveries, and there are an awful lot of liveries included with this aircraft, which is very nice indeed. We've got G Bozzy here, which apparently is Conington Flying Club. I don't know if it's still there. I actually did some flying out of Peterborough Conington not too long ago, and I don't remember spotting it, but it may still be there. Don't know, I'm not sure. Another G registered aircraft here, G Opti, rather nice duck egg blue colour, very sort of classic. That's a bit odd. And you can see that all of these aircraft have wheel spats installed. Now, these are something which you can add or remove at your own leisure, which is very cool. So, a very nice looking livery there. Canadian aircraft here. Another lovely bright blue coloured aeroplane with a bit of a purple streak up the side, very stylish. Good old Deutschland registered aircraft, German, very, very traditional sort of Piper colour, that lovely hearing aid beige, as I christened it a few videos ago, with a nice German flag on the back there. One for our French friends here, with little logos on the wheel spats. It's very cool. Some nice blue gradiated stripes and white. Météo France. I'm not even going to attempt to explain what that is. Not a clue. You tell me. November registered, good old US aircraft. Very nice. Like a deep red with a bit of orange. And a sort of brown coloured spinner. Victor Hotel Reg, the good old Australians with the Australian Air Force roundel on the side. So I'm not sure if this is an actual training aircraft for the Australian Air Force, but very cool. It kind of looks like the livery that you may have seen old RAF training aircraft painted in, such as the Bulldog or the Jet Provost. This is my personal favourite, G6T. This, I believe it's based in Shoreham, the real aircraft. It's actually a combination of a BOAC livery on this side and the BEA livery on this side. So that's two companies that went into making up the modern day British Airways. Very, very attractive looking aeroplane. Grey and black with these little sort of yellow accents and the red wing on this side. Very, very pretty. Really, really nice, and the Union Jack on the back. So I think we'll be flying this one. A couple of my real world friends who are commercial pilots actually flew this while they were doing their PPL, which is quite cool. And we've got a custom one at the end here, which is just the Bozzy livery with the reg deleted. So you can pop your own reg on there if you want to fly your own custom registration. I'll pop inside. Now, any of you who are familiar with the arrows from Just Flight will find this fairly familiar. It is pretty much the same story with a few obvious omissions. There's no gear, there's no prop lever. We've got a carb heat instead of a alternate air. A few extra little switches over here. But for the most part, the cabin's very similar and the panel's very similar. I'm not sure if they reused the seats from the Arrow 3, but they certainly look very, very similar. Not quite sure if they're exactly the same, though. The seats in the cockpit do look quite familiar. Certainly this sort of headlining is pretty much the same, with a few of the usual sort of Just Flight slight degradations in quality for bits of the cockpit that you aren't going to be looking at too often. Now, they do this in order to improve frame rates, so I'm not going to get on their back too much about that. But if you are somebody who requires absolute pin-sharp fidelities and all the textures all the way around the aeroplane, that is something which may annoy you, so that's a point to note. I've got an iPad here which does various different things with the aeroplane. Pretty much every add-on aircraft has got some sort of iPad EFB type add-on these days. and this one is no exception, just like the arrows. So there's all sorts of various things you can do with that. I'll show it off when we get into the simulator. But the panel is lovely, really. The panel is very, very high quality, and we've got these sort of traditional instruments fitted here as well. So you've got your traditional 6-pack. We've got the good old rubbish RBI over here, and a couple of omni-bearing indicators for the nav radios. Now you can see I've got the GTN 750 mod fitted here. There are various different configs you can fit to the aircraft, and I will go through them when we get into the simulator. So that's the outside and the inside, and a little bit of history about the aeroplane. If you are still awake, congratulations, it's time to go into the sim. And we are back in the simulator in a lovely sunny Doncaster, and here is our gorgeous looking Piper Warrior. Now, as always, the textures always look better in the simulator than they do in the hangar. So you can see in the sim, this looks really nice and sharp. You can see all those little screws and things. Very, very nice indeed. You can see the doors open there, and one of our crew is already on board. No doubt making sure that the aeroplane hasn't disintegrated while it's been parked up overnight. Yeah, so very, very nice looking exterior, in my opinion, certainly. So, before we crack on with anything else, let's have a look through some of these external items that we can put on here. So, here's the iPad. I've got it fired up here. So, as you can see, I've got the chocks, tie downs, and wheel fairings installed. So, let's take the wheel fairings off and have a look what it looks like without these. So, this is the sort of look that you will probably find on the majority of Warriors these days. Not many of them have the wheel fairings on there. Certainly not flying school aeroplanes, because generally what happens is the aircraft might sort of fly around with its wheel fairings on for a little bit, then it'll go into maintenance, they'll need to take them off to check the tyres or something, and the engineers will just sort of shove them in the back of the hangar and lose them. So most flying school aircraft really don't have the lovely nice wheel fairings installed. It's mostly privately owned aircraft that have those. And you can see these little hubcap things as well here. This is another thing which almost always goes missing on flying school aircraft, because like I said, same story, engineers take them off and just throw them in the back of the hangar and lose them. But it's nice to have them on this aircraft here. We can sort of role play a slightly more looked after aeroplane, shall we say. The tie downs, as you can see, the same story as you've probably seen on the Piper Arrow aircraft from Just Flight. So nice looking there, and we've got a set of chocks for each wheel, which is true luxury indeed. The tow bar, we can pop that up here as well, and we can see the little tow bar here which attaches up at the top, which is a little bit different to the tow bars that I am used to on PA-28, because the ones that I am used to attach down here. See this little horizontal thing here on the top of the nose wheel fairing bit here. So it's basically just like a thing that pokes through two holes there and allows you to push and pull the aeroplane and steer the nose wheel at the same time. This thing that's attached up at the top here, this part, I don't know, does it rotate? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it probably does rotate, just this bottom here, and this top bit doesn't. But I don't know, I've never seen a tow bar that works like that, but I'm sure Just Flight have done their research, and that is the way that some PA-28 tow bars do work. Now you can see, oh hello, we've got our door and baggage door open, and they still haven't added that little strap. See this little strap here? So in real life you unhook this from the bottom and then you hook it onto. Now there should be a little thing that sticks out up here. One of these rivets here should actually stick sort of proud with a little fastener on it, and you pop that onto there, and that's what holds this door open. But the door is in fact being held open by space magic at the moment, which is a little bit immersion breaking, I guess, if you're sort of really familiar with the aeroplane. You can see the catch is popped open here, which is very nice to see, and the catches for the door have also popped open, so that's quite cool. We'll get the chocks and tie downs and get the doors closed as well now, because we are going to get our aircraft going in a second. One more thing I am going to show you. I'm going to pop the park brake off, and you can see the catches have all closed now. And we're going to push our airplane back. So I'm just going to use Shift P in the best traditions of Flight Simulator. And you can see when we do that, the tow bar appears. So that's something that they added onto, I think the Turbo Arrow was the first one to have it, but I think they've retro patched it into the regular Arrow as well, and now obviously this aircraft's got it too. So we're going to push back the sort of middle of the apron here, just so we got some space, and pop the parking brake back on. And then we can crack on with getting the aeroplane airborne. Now, just a quick note on the actual format that the flight is going to take. So we're going to get the aircraft fired up using a real-world checklist. I've got a real-world checklist to my side here, which I actually use in the aeroplanes that belong to my flying school. So it is a company checklist. Your checklist may differ, and indeed the checklist which comes with the airplane may differ, but this is still a very, very good, very, very in-depth checklist, which I believe is lifted straight from the POH of the real aircraft. So this is just as good as a real life one. However, I'm just going with the normal format that I do for these videos. I always use a real aircraft checklist. So once we've got the aircraft going, we'll get into the air. We're going to fly directly southbound. We'll measure the aircraft's climb performance and cruise performance against the real-world aircraft Pilot's Operating Handbook numbers. So I've run a couple of performance graphs for this aircraft, and we should be able to match those up to what we've got in the sim today. The sim conditions, we have ISA standard conditions. That's 15 degrees temperature on the ground, no wind, no cloud, everything just default and calm to give us the best chance of measuring this aircraft against the real-world performance statistics that we're supposed to be able to achieve with this aeroplane. Once we've done that, we're going to go into some general handling, which is going to consist of a couple of stalls and a couple of steep turns as well. And then we're going to pop on this autopilot, which is very nice and fancy for those of you familiar with the Arrow. And we're going to use the autopilot and the lovely GTN 750 to navigate our way the rest of the way to Nottingham, to just demonstrate how the aircraft cruises and how good of a touring aeroplane in the sim it's going to be for you. We'll then do a join into Nottingham and 3 circuits, a standard circuit with full flap, a flapless approach, and a glide approach to land. We're then going to park up, and I'm going to talk about what I think about the aeroplane after that, if you are still awake and with me. So, without further ado, let's crack on and get the aeroplane started, shall we? Now, first things first, I'm going to put my wheel fairings back on, because the performance graphs that I have are for an aircraft with wheel fairings. So I'm going to stick them on, and also I guess I just like the look of them. So I'm going to go from the internal starting checklist. So that is parking brake on. So our parking brake is pulled out and set. So that's good. Door as required. So we've shut the door. It's not too hot in the simulator today. So that's good. Passenger safety brief. I'll assume you're all familiar with the aircraft. You don't want a brief. Seats and belts secure. Flight controls. So let's do a quick full and free round the box. And I've just smacked my keyboard, and that's why that's come up. There we go. Pop my seat back. Okay, cool. Flight controls good. Flaps, check. So we would pop the flaps down in stages and check that both sides are operating, but I can't quite see past my friend here. I've got him in the cockpit here today because we've actually had to load the aircraft up to max takeoff weight, because they're the figures that I have on the performance graphs. They've all been calculated for maximum takeoff weight. So I have loaded my airplane up fully. You can take this guy away if you want by hitting this button here, and he'll just disappear, give you a better view out the right hand side of the airplane. However, when you do that, you lose his weight out of the aircraft as well, so it actually does add the weight of this chap into the overall weight of the aircraft, which is very nice to see. Anyway, I'm getting out of order again. Trim ×2, so we check that our rudder trim is in the middle. It's not been messed around with, so that's fine. We check that our pitch trim is in the neutral position here, which it is. Alternate static source, so there should be an alternate static source underneath the panel here. Now, I don't know if Just Flight have actually modelled this or not. I can't quite see it. In the real aeroplane, it's very hard to find. It's kind of underneath the panel. I'm not going to go too in-depth with trying to locate that. But if any of you have been able to find that on this aircraft, please let me know. It'd be quite cool to see if I actually modelled it. Lights, so we're going to pop our nav lights on. So that's on this switch here, and as I always tell my students, just make sure you got it round all the way to the off position, all the way to the bottom, and then just go just past the click. If you keep winding, it's going to put all the panel lights on and drain the battery when we put the master battery switch on. And speaking of master battery, that's our next item, so I'm going to pop that on. You can hear the gyros spinning up. Our annunciator panel has lit up, and our fuel quantity indicators are reading full, which is good because I did fill the tanks up before this flight. Circuit breakers, so we check the circuit breakers are all in. That's very important on this aircraft because the circuit breakers all work. So you can see I can pop all of these out. So if you were to get any of these pop out, then it would disable the system on the aircraft, which is very nice to see, and it's basically just the same as the Just Flight arrows. Annunciator and low volt lights, so annunciators are all lit up here. I don't believe we have a low voltage light unless I'm completely blind. Oh yeah, we do, it's right there. It's not on right now because the battery isn't quite draining, but we can push it in and test it, and it does in fact work. That should actually, if we leave the battery on for long enough and it starts to drain down, that should actually pop on. Turn coordinator flag out, so the little doll's eye flag has disappeared and we can actually hear the electric gyro running there. ATIS, it's fine, we don't need the ATIS, we know there's no weather today. Radios are all off, so that's good. Tacho and Hobbs, so we'd record the aircraft's Hobbs meter over here. As you can see, I've already been flying around a little bit, so it's wound up a touch. Fuel selector set to the lowest tank. Well, we've got full tanks both sides, so we'll just set it to left tank to start. Throttle full and free, so we go all the way up and all the way down, and then set about ½ an inch open. Mixture full free set rich, so again we'll cycle it. I'm doing this on my joystick throttle, by the way, and go all the way forward. Carb heat, full and free, and set off, so we'll drag that up and down. Carburetted engine in this aircraft, 160 horsepower, like I said, in the hangar. 4-cylinder, normally aspirated, air-cooled engine, Lycoming engine. Very, very common type of engine for small, light aircraft. Fuel pump on, so we put the fuel pump on, and we check that the fuel pressure has come alive. And that noise, by the way, is absolutely perfect. That's just what the real aircraft's fuel pump sounds like. And speaking of noises, now this aircraft, we're lucky to have a blower fan fitted to this aeroplane. So if I put this on, you can actually hear they've modelled the sound of the blower fan. It's actually surprisingly loud in real life, and they've done a great job of modelling that too. So top marks to Just Flight for the sounds so far. So that's all good. Carb heat's off, fuel pump is on, and the pressure's checked as we've just done. Cabin heat, so we check that both of these are in the off position, and they are. It's a cold start, so we're going to give it about 4 primes. My throttle's all over the place because it's a rubbish old thing. And 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you may wonder why I was waiting a second when I pulled it out. In the real aircraft, it's very important when you pull the primer out that you allow the sort of plunger to fill up with fuel before you plunge it back in. So you don't just kind of pump it in and out as fast as you can, otherwise you aren't getting the benefit of the actual fuel in the primer. So we look all around and we clear prop, whatever. There's no virtual people to mince mags, and starter. So let's have a quick look around. We're all good. And cover the brakes, and I'm just going to rotate it here. And start her up. There we go, we got a good start. Starter warning light out, oil pressure is in the green band, and we're going to set our ground idle of 1200 RPM. And that is our post-start memory items all complete. Now, a quick note about the start. If you have a honeycomb yoke, as I do, you obviously you're probably used to using the little mag starter switch on that to start your aeroplanes up. If you try that with this aeroplane, it won't work. Now, it's not so much a fault of Just Flight, it's more of a fault of the simulator, I guess. But when you use that little honeycomb switch, it only allows you to hold it in the start position for a couple of seconds before it just defaults back to both. And that isn't long enough to start this aeroplane. Just Flights have done a great job of modelling the actual amount of time it takes to crank this engine into life. And that 2 seconds that the sim gives you on your little honeycomb switch is not enough to crank the aircraft into life to actually start it. So what I've done is I've debound my mag and start switch for this aeroplane, and I'm just using it in the cockpit. So that's all good. All pressure throttle, yeah. Fire, well obviously we're not on fire. Brakes are holding. The fuel pump can now go off and the pressure is holding, so that means our mechanical fuel pump is working. Avionics can come on. So this is one of the slightly odd things about this airplane. Now, my honeycomb avionics switches don't actually work for some reason with this. So I have to kind of phase into my co-pilot here and pop the avionics on using this little switch here. Now, if you've watched my first impressions video, you know that I couldn't find that at all, and in fact I used the emergency backup avionics switch under this switch guard here to get the avionics to come on, and thankfully somebody in the comments told me that it was supposed to be over there. So it can be quite tricky to spot, and the avionics switch on your honeycomb, if you're using honeycomb or any other kind of yoke, isn't going to work for whatever reason. So one of the slightly odd things about this airplane, but it's nice that there's actually avionics switch modelled in this aircraft. Okay, next item is annunciator and low voltage light. So as you can see, our annunciator panel is out and we can push to test, and yeah, it still all works. Low voltage light is off and we can push to test that, that's still working. Ammeter should be charging, so our ammeter is down here on this aircraft. We've got quite a bit of charge here, which is normal for an aircraft which has just started up and the battery needs a little bit of power putting back into it. Suction should be 3 to 5 inches. Our suction is below this iPad here, so I'm going to just take it away. And as you can see, it's about 4.5, so that's perfect. Magnetos, we're going to do a quick drop, no stop on the mags and make sure that we get a drop, which indicates the switch is working, but we don't actually have an engine stop, which indicates that the magneto isn't working, or indeed the spark plugs. Flight instruments, so we're going to go left to right across our 6-pack. So we've got our airspeed indicator here, subscale's moving, gauge isn't broken, reading what it should be, which is 0. Little bars are moving as they should. It's upright and not broken. Now our altimeter should be set to 1013 because that's our pressure in the sim today. And it's reading airfield elevation, which is around about 50 feet. So it's a little bit off that, but it's within 50 feet, so that's more than accurate enough for us. And we can come down, turn coordinates, flags out, wings level, balls in the middle, not broken. DI. So you can actually fit a HSI to this aircraft using one of the options on here. So we can go HSI there, and that is a fully slaved HSI which doesn't require a lining. But that's what I usually use when I fly the Arrow, so I thought I'd go for something which is more typical of a Warrior. Very few Warriors, I believe, have a slaved HSI fitted. So I'm going to go with this thing here, which needs to be lined up. So we're going to check there. We got about 340. And we've got 340 here. We've got a heading bug, and we'll just check that that works. And I'm going to set it to the runway heading, which I'm going to use for today, which is runway 20. So it's about 199, I believe. And vertical speed indicator is reading 0, and it's not broken. So that's our flight instruments checked and set. Com radios, so I'm not going to bother with that, but the GTN 750, you can pop all sorts of frequencies in there. Say 126.225 for Doncaster radar on standby. You can shove that in there. It's a very, very good system, this. I'll show a little bit of what you can do with it during the flight. Nav radios, so we've got 11095, which is the Doncaster ILS pre-tuned into there. So we aren't actually picking anything up at the moment for whatever reason. I don't know if I've got it tuned to the wrong thing. Have I not? No. Oh, I've got it in GPS mode, that's why. Right, let's pop the CDI back into VLOC, and as you can see, it is now giving us a localizer, but not a glide slope. That's absolutely fine. And we're also getting 0.6 miles on the DME here. Now we can listen in if it will give us an ident. I'm not sure if it will. Maybe not. Maybe not. I'll do the ADF while we're on that. So these are all instruments which are basically all radios, which are pretty much the same as the... turn the volume up on here, maybe? Maybe? No. Yeah, so these are all pretty much the same as the ones you find in the Arrow. Pop that off now. Can we get an ADF ident, maybe? No. I think this is more of a Microsoft Flight Simulator thing than a Just Flight thing. Probably be able to pick that up a little bit closer to the runway. In real life, you'd be able to pick that up, no problem. And as you can see, the needle is pointing at the beacon, and we can switch it to antenna, and now it should park on the wing. But it doesn't. We can turn it off and it'll park on the wing. Now, in the real aeroplane, turn it to antenna mode, It should point all the way at the right wing, and then back to ADF it swings back to the beacon. That's how you test that radio. So hopefully Just Flight will be able to add that feature. I've been talking about that in a couple of these reviews. They've not quite sorted that out just yet. But we're happy with the radios. While we're on the subject of radios, I'm just going to show you the different radio setups you can have here. So there's the old 25 kilohertz radios, which are a bit rubbish, but very, very nicely weathered up. We can go with a dual GPS setup here, which is a 530 and a 430. Just the 530 in the old radios over here. Or you can go with the 750, which is my personal preference because it is very, very good. And this is a free mod which you can pick up, and you can integrate it not just with this aeroplane, but also the Just Flight arrows and all of the Carenado aeroplanes as well now, apart from the glass cockpit ones. So yeah, really, really cool bit of kit. I certainly recommend going out and picking it up. In fact, I will leave a link in the description for you if you do want to go and download it. Anyway, getting a little bit sidetracked as usual. My apologies. Flight plan, we're not going to bother putting a flight plan in because we're fully VFR today. Transponder, flight ID, we don't have, but we have 7,000 at standby, so we're happy with that. Taxi clearance, don't need because we're not talking to ATC today. Landing light is required, it's not night time, so that's fine. So we just got our taxi checks to do, and we are all good and ready to go. So I'll just reset the camera, get rid of the iPad, and we'll get going. So we'll idle throttle, release the parking brake. And you can see the aircraft sort of rolling a little bit under its own power. Given the benefit of the doubt, it might just be a little bit of incline on the ground. Normally that wouldn't generally happen, but for the most part the handling characteristics of the airplane on the ground are about what you would expect. It's quite heavy. It certainly doesn't feel like a go-kart like some flight simulator aircraft can do. Ground handling is actually a really tricky thing to model in a flight simulator. Even the level D simulators, which I've flown in the past, are very sort of weird and dodgy on the ground. They can kind of make you feel quite sick because they don't sort of model the movement of an aeroplane on the ground all that well, and what you're feeling doesn't match up with what you're seeing. But Just Flight have done a pretty good job of modelling what a Warrior taxi's like, I think, as far as I can tell. You can see that the aeroplane's kind of nodding up and down. It's quite sort of bouncy. That's absolutely something that you see in real life. Certainly if you're sitting in the back of one of these aeroplanes, you're kind of bouncing up and down all the time when you're taxiing. Sounds-wise, we can pop the window open and listen to some Warrior noises. The sounds that Just Flight have included with this aeroplane are very, very accurate. Pop outside and listen to this. This is really spot on with what you'd be hearing from the real aeroplane. Come around the corner here, so we're just going to do our taxi check. So numbers decreasing, wings left, balls right. Everything else is stable. I'm just going to check the rudder as we're coming around this corner and make sure we've got full rudder travel left and right. Normally I'd be checking the brakes as well, so right, left, both together. You're supposed to really do that as soon as you start rolling, but obviously I'm a terrible pilot and I don't remember to do these things. Hey, I'm just used to sitting in the right-hand seat and telling students off for not doing it, okay? Okay, so here we are at the threshold. I've turned the aircraft into, well, into the no wind, but we've just turned off the centre line a little bit. Obviously, if there's wind, you always try to point the aircraft into wind. So taxi checks are all complete, and as expected, power checks. So parking brake is on, temperatures and pressures, so we're going to check our oil temperature and make sure we do have some, which indicates that the aircraft is safe to rev up for our power checks. Fuel selector we're going to change to make sure that the other tank is working, fuel pressure is maintained. Mixture's checked rich. Cover the brakes, we're going to check clear behind, there's nobody behind that we can blow over. I'm going to advance the throttle up to 2,000 RPM. See the aircraft moving around in the prop wash of its own propeller, which is a really nice, realistic thing to see. So there's 2,000 RPM. I'm going to check our temperature pressures are still in limit suction 4.9 to 5.1, and I believe we have about 5.0 there, which is perfectly in the middle of those things. Carb heat, so I'm going to check our carb heat. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to check our carb heat. I'm such an idiot. Okay, so we're looking for a drop of about sort of 50 RPM or so. It is dropping a little bit, maybe not quite as much as you'd expect in real life. And then when you bring it back to cold you're expecting it to recover to 2,000. If it recovers to above 2,000, that's an indication that you were accruing carburetor icing. Magnetos, so we're going to check the mags now individually, looking for a maximum drop of 175 RPM, a maximum difference between the two of 50, so that's about 50 RPM drop, back to both, let it recover, right mag, and again about a 50 RPM drop, back to both, that's perfectly within limits. Throttle, now we're going to check the idle now, and it should be between 5 and 700 RPM when we do this. So let it come down, and we've got about 750. It's maybe a touch higher than you'd expect here. Maybe something just Flight can just sort out. I'll tweak it down just a touch. And we'll go back to 1200. We don't like to loiter for too long with the throttle fully at idle because the engine isn't getting the cooling it requires. It's not moving the oil around the engine like it should be doing, and also it's increasing the chances that the spark plugs are going to foul up with carbon. So that's why we always reset to our ground idle of 1200 RPM. So we're going to pop our fuel pump on now. Throttle friction is set as required, so the throttle friction lever is this little thing over here, which presumably you can move, but I'm not going to turn the engine off again. Okay, so next item is going to be mixture set full rich, and so we've just checked that. Primer, we'll just check that that is locked and it's not going anywhere. Temperatures and pressures in limits, so everything is in the green. We're looking good here. Fuel content sufficient to note, so we've got 5 hours of fuel on board, and the flight is probably going to take us about 20 minutes. So we've got more than enough reserve fuel. Before departure, we don't need a departure clearance because we're not talking to anyone. Nav radios, we've already had a quick look at those. I suppose we can have another go at identing. See if it feels like making a noise. Maybe it just doesn't today. Who knows? Or maybe I'm just stupid and I've not turned the idents on. But hey ho. It is. Yeah, it is actually identing on the text here. But you should be able to get an audio ident out of that. Don't know, probably just doing something wrong because I am extremely stupid. Pointers and bugs, so let's set runway heading on here. Yes, and let's also zoom in and out all over the place. My mouse is really poor for that, to be perfectly honest. Apologies for anyone who I just made sick just then. And there's runway heading. DI, so let's double check our DI. It will drift on us if we're not careful, so we have 195 on there, and adjust it slightly this way, 195 on there. Altimeter set, we only got one altimeter, so 1013 is set, and it's reading 50 feet, plus or minus 50 feet. Transponder code 7000, and we're still standby on there. Com radios are tuned, Com 1 is active, don't have to worry too much about that because we're not going to be talking to anyone. Map is set and the range is appropriate for the departure, maybe zoom it out one touch. Trimmers ×2, so pitch trim set neutral, and rudder trim I'm not going to mess with because it takes a billion years to get it lined back up again on the real aircraft, and I suspect it's probably similar on here. Flaps, well, we don't need, they are all away. Controls, let's do a quick full and free check. So, full right side up, yeah, like that. Sorry, it's kind of getting in the way of my iPad. Left hand down, left side up. Full back, trailing edge up. Full forward, trailing edge down. Back to the middle, and everything else is returned to the neutral position. Door is secure, so we've got the bottom catch and the top catch are both in. Seats and belts, yeah, well, we'll assume everybody's all belted up. Departure brief, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to give one of those. Hoods or goggles don't need, and annunciations are all clear. Nothing's flashing, nothing's brightly shining, so we are all good on that front, and I can put the checklist to one side now and crack on with the actual flying of the aeroplane. So, idle throttle, release the parking brake. Let's go for our line up now. I said release the parking brake. So, the first thing we're going to be noting on our takeoff is we're going to be noting that the aircraft's climb performance. Now, the figures that I've run for this aircraft from the Pilot's Operating Handbook have indicated that we're going to be getting just over 700 feet per minute initially, falling back to about 550 to 570 feet per minute as we gain altitude. And we're going to do our ATPL checks. So approach path is clear. Ooh, transponder can go on altitude reporting, and the code is set. Pitot heat is on, and all the lights can come on. And we are aligned upon runway 20 at Doncaster, and everything's looking good. T's and P's are good. We'll give it one last quick blast of carb heat to make sure that we've got no ice, probably a bit more than that. I'm going to start holding the brakes and ramping the power up a little bit. Okay. And we're going to start our stopwatch as well for our Frida checks. So, without further ado, let's get the bird in the air. So, release the brakes, full power set. Really good. Sound very much like the real aeroplane. A bit of right pedal required to keep the aeroplane on the runway, but not quite as much as the Arrow, just not as much power or torque available to this aeroplane. We're looking for 60 knots for our rotation speed, slightly lower rotation than the Arrow, and off we go. Fair bit of effort required to pull her off the ground. Bit of nose up pitch trim. We'll let the aircraft accelerate to our climb speed, which is 79 knots, but seeing as I'm not enough of a sky god to fly within 1 knot, I'm going to just aim for 80. Fair bit of right rudder required to keep the ball in the middle. And she's pretty nice, benign, very stable, exactly what you'd expect of a PA-28 family aeroplane. So once I've got the speed sorted out, let's have a look what kind of climb performance we're getting. Now we're getting just over 500 feet per minute at the moment. Let's see, 5, 6, 700, just over 700 feet per minute, which is pretty much spot on where it should be. Perfect. I shall try and keep the aircraft as close to 80 knots as I possibly can. Bear in mind my flying skills are extremely mediocre, so maybe a little bit all over the place. There's 1,000 feet coming up, so we'll do our after takeoff checks. Flaps are up. Landing light can come off. Engine T's and P's are all green. We're happy with those. Attitude and trim is set for the climb, just about. And the fuel pump can come off. And fuel pressure is being maintained, so we're happy that our mechanical fuel pump is doing its job. And we're just going to climb out on runway heading and go straight ahead to 3,000 feet. We'll see how the aircraft performs. You can see that the climb performance is dropping off slightly as we climb. That's perfectly normal for a normally aspirated aircraft. Even more so an aircraft with a fixed pitch propeller. It's even more noticeable. Good climb performance in one of these airplanes, even with a full load. I was flying ours the other day and I was kind of shocked when it jumped off the runway and went over 1,000 feet per minute in the climb. But you can get those sorts of figures out of a lightly loaded PA-28. And there's just me on board. Believe it or not, I'm not enormously heavy. So it is quite a sprightly performer. Bear in mind, obviously, we've got all the seats filled today and full tanks. We've got full load for the sake of our performance tests. So it's not quite as quick. Part of the reason it's so good in the climb is that nice long wing is very effective at this sort of airspeed. Okay, so we're now approaching 3,000 feet, and as you can see, our climb performance has dropped off to just north of 500 feet per minute, 600 feet per minute. So it is still following what you should be getting out of the aircraft according to the pilot's operating handbook, so it's all good. Bear in mind, we can't sort of treat the pilot's operating handbook as gospel. It's usually, the figures in the POH are usually a little bit adjusted down from what you might expect from a nice, fresh, well-maintained aeroplane with a good coat of paint on it. So it's well within the sort of window of variance, the little variations we're getting up from that. And we're going to level off at 3,000 feet. So lovely. That is really quite nice. It's bang on the numbers, but anyone who's familiar with Just Flight products for Microsoft Flight Simulator knows they are generally very, very good at getting the performance correct. And I'm going to hold it at full throttle until we hit close to our cruise speed, which is going to be around about 110 knots. I'll get the graph on the screen for you. So at this altitude, with the aircraft properly set at a 75% power setting, which is going to be 2350 RPM, which I've managed to set magically just by muscle memory there. And with the aircraft leaned out properly, we should be getting about 110, 111 knots. So let's do the leaning. Now we actually have a working, that's the amps. We do have somewhere. Where is it? There we go. Completely slipped my mind. A working EGT gauge. So what we're going to do is we're going to lean off for peak EGT. So you can see the EGT is dropping a little bit now, so that means we've gone a little bit too far. So we just wind forward a little bit north of that, just give us a slight bit of safety margin. And we'll see what kind of TAS we get out of the bird at this sort of altitude. And outside air temperature, atmospheric conditions, we've got 10 degrees. So I'm going to line up 3,000 feet against our 10 degree line there, plus 10 degrees of course. And we can see we're just north of 110 knots, so that's pretty much perfect. In a very slight descent there, but yeah, that's exactly where I'd expect to see this. So top marks for Just Flight so far. They've done a brilliant job modelling the performance characteristics of the aeroplane. Now, something that I've seen mentioned in the comments is, does the aeroplane return to the middle when you try to deflect it off into a roll? And I sort of had to think about that for a second. It's like, well, what was this person commenting about? Well, I think what he means is that light aircraft are generally set up to be inherently stable, which means when you're in a rough atmosphere, if you're flying through turbulence and you're getting sort of bounced around all over the place, and the aircraft sort of takes a deflection up or to the side or something like that, then generally the aircraft will return to a relatively neutral position instead of exponentially going more and more nose up or exponentially going more and more nose down, wing right, wing left, whatever, to a certain degree. However, if you are in smooth air conditions like this and you just deflect the aircraft into a roll and leave it, then essentially what you're going to be doing is entering into a spiral descent. Now, I can post a little picture of the triangle of forces on an aircraft in a turn, which sort of explains how this works. Basically, the lift of the airplane, when you tilt it off to the side in a turn, tries to drag the aircraft bodily sideways through the air. And because the aircraft is essentially a huge weather vane, it's got a big tail on one end, nothing on the other. It doesn't like being dragged straight sideways through the air, so it will try to yaw. And that yaw will mean that one wing is accelerated slightly faster than the other and will therefore produce more lift, which will induce more roll, which will then induce more yaw, which will then induce more roll, and eventually you'll get into a situation where the aircraft is in a very steep spiraling descent, or the graveyard spiral, as you might sometimes hear it referred to. It has claimed quite a few lives over the years, and it's usually situations where you're in instrument conditions and you've got no reference to the external horizon, that it's very easy to enter into one of these. And I'll try to demonstrate now what it looks like. So our aircraft is nice and trimmed out, straight and level. All I'm going to do, I'm not going to touch any of the controls. I've got my feet off the rudder. I'm just going to deflect it into a roll. And you can see we're starting to yaw as well. Our rate of descent is increasing. Now our rate of roll is kind of steady. It is increasing slightly, but I would usually expect it to be rolling a little bit more than that. It is, yeah, it's coming up a little bit. But I would expect it to be doing something like this sort of thing. So I'm just deflecting a little bit of aileron in here to simulate it. And the correct recovery is power to idle, roll, wings level, and then pitch. So it does exhibit mostly the characteristics that I would expect from the real aeroplane under those kinds of conditions. However, I would expect a little bit more roll, I think. I'm not sure if this is a Microsoft Flight Simulator thing that they need to refine a little bit, or if Just Flight can tweak the flight model a little bit to make it do that. But generally, I would expect the yaw to be inducing a bit more roll. Now, I can try the same thing again. We're back up at 3,000 feet now, so let's level off and allow the aircraft to speed up again. I can try to do the same thing just with rudder input. So technically, you can induce a spiral descent with either roll or yaw inputs. So I'm just going to boot a bunch of rudder in. I'll let it speed back up again, give it full power. Should probably be mixture full rich again for this as well, given that we're going to be tipping the airplane into a descent. So we're pretty much back up at our cruise speed now. So I'm going to reset cruise RPM, something around there. And I'm just going to let the aircraft settle and then kick a load of right rudder in and see what happens. So there we go. So the right rudder is inducing it. So this is doing it much better. See how the roll's coming in? I'm not touching the yoke at all now. This is just rudder input. So your roll, even more yaw, even more roll, and we're ending up in this death spiral towards the ground. So power, roll, and pitch, and we can see we're getting very close to VNE there. So before we lose our wings, let's get the aircraft recovered back into the climb. So those kind of maneuvers are things that we practice with our students all the time, just because of the dangers that they can potentially encounter and the dangers that that situation represents to any pilot. So the recovery procedure from a spiral descent is one of the first things you'll teach a student on the private pilot's license course. So any of you private pilots out there, you will more than likely have experienced that sort of spiral descent recovery maneuver, and you'll know power, roll, pitch off by heart, I'm sure. Anyway, let's get back up to 3,000 feet and get on with our test flight. Okay, so we're back up at just over 3,000 feet now, and it's time for us to test some general handling maneuvers. So we're going to start with our traditional one. It's the clean stall, fully developed, and we're just coming up to our first tank change, so we'll do that as part of our setup for the maneuver as well. So let's do our fuel, and change tanks, and we'll leave the pump on for the maneuver. Radio's all good, engine T's and B's are fine. Let's give it some carb heats. DI is, compass is reading 170, so we need to align our DI a little bit, just like that. And altimeter 1013, and that's not changed, so it's all good. And our setup of the maneuver is height sufficient to be recovered for 2,500 feet, which we are. Airframe is clean, safety and security, nothing just bashes in the back of the head in the back of the airplane. We're all happy, apart from our two virtual passengers who are back there. They're going to have some fun. Engine, T's and P's good, carb heat just checked, fuel pump's on, location, clear of active airspace, active airfields, built up areas, controlled airspace and danger zones. I always muff my words when I'm saying that. And lookout, so normally we do a lookout turn, but we aren't going to bother with that because there's no other aeroplanes in the sim today, there's just us. So I'm going to reduce the power all the way to idle. I'm not going to bother with the carb heat in this case. It's the one maneuver where I say you can go below 2,000 feet without bothering with any 2,000 RPM, sorry, without bothering with any carb heat. A little bit of left pedal to counteract the aircraft's natural tendency to yaw right under no power. A little bit of trim to help with the nose up as well, but none below 80 because otherwise it makes it very hard to recover properly. I'm just going to pitch to maintain. There's the stall warner. There's the buffet. And there she goes. Got the high rate of descent. I've got full nose up elevator in now. The aircraft's basically stalled at this point. It's very, very benign. You can see the wing is dropping very slightly. I'm just going to relax that back pressure, select full power right rudder to counteract the propeller slipstream effect, and reset the aircraft to a climb at VY, and come back up to 3,000 feet. So as you can see, the aircraft very, very benign in the full stall, which is exactly what pretty much every aeroplane in the PA-28 family does in the stall. It just kind of mushes around, which is very, very handy for low hour pilots because it means it's not going to snap, drop a wing and try to spin you into the floor. But as a flying instructor, sometimes it's actually quite good to have an aeroplane that is really nasty in that sense, that will try to drop a wing and fly you into the ground, because it allows you to demonstrate how to deal with that. So in one sense that's fantastic for low hour pilots, and in another sense it's kind of not great for flying instructors, but you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Okay, so let's have another crack at another maneuver, and I'm going to change our heading a little bit for this one. I don't want us to be getting too close to Nottingham right now, so I'm going to go for an easterly heading. This is such a lovely aeroplane to fly in the simulator. It's very, very stable, and even a ham-fisted moron like me can fly it really quite accurately. It's just the sort of aeroplane you take a great deal of pleasure in just flying around by hand, really, which is really what a light aircraft should be. A touch slow here, let's add a bit of power. What RPM we got? Right, so let's set up for our approach configuration stall, shall we? So airframe, we're below 108 knots, flaps 1, flaps 2, and all the way flaps 3. And everything else is still good. We're just going to give a quick blast on the carby, make sure we're not picking up any ice, and we aren't. And we'll just pop straight into the maneuver. No lookout turns required. Now we'll do this as a power on stall, so I'm going to leave a little bit of power in there and just let the speed decay, using a bit of trim to help me hold the nose up, but not too much below 80 as before. So I'm expecting the aircraft to be maybe a little bit more snappy with the power on stall. And there we go. No, it's just as benign. I mean, typical PA-28 really. It's just mushing around at the stall. You can see the rate of descent, high rate of descent, unrecoverable, and a little bit of uncommanded roll there. So let's relax that back pressure. We'll go full power, kick that right pedal in again. Pitch for the climb. As soon as you've got the pitch, we'll select flaps 2, get rid of the drag flap. And now we're looking for positive rate of climb. Positive rate of climb we have flaps 1. Airspeed's building now. Positive we have again. Flaps up, accelerate to VY. And that is our maneuver complete. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's a pretty damn accurate representation of how a PA-28 stalls under those configurations. Of course, your opinion may differ, but as far as my experience goes, that's pretty much spot on. So, top marks, just fine, well done. There's 3,000 feet again. You notice I keep going for the throttle every time we level off. I'm just way too used to flying the Arrow these days. The Arrows just accelerate so much quicker than this does. Okay, so we got one more maneuver to do before we pop off back to Nottingham for our circuits. And that is going to be a couple of steep turns, or well, at least one steep turn. So I'm going to pop the yoke up so you can see what inputs I'm putting in. So steep turn is 45-degree angle of bank or more, so that's the little dot on the attitude indicator just there. We are all set up, the fuel pump is on, T's and P's good, give it another quick blast to carby just in case. Good look out in the direction we're going in, but I guess that's kind of superfluous because there's no other aeroplanes in the sim right now. Take a quick note of where we are. There's Newark just there, so we are in a fairly open area. We can use that as a bit of an anchor point. So we're going to go all the way around and back onto east, and we're going to go to the left. So the maneuver is going to be bank, balance with rudder pressure and back pressure on the yoke, and then select full power. And I'm looking for a fairly stable steep turn, not a huge amount of input required. I'm looking at the altimeter as we're going round, because that's our direct reading instrument, not the vertical speed indicator, which is a trend instrument. And just setting a picture outside the aeroplane and flying the aeroplane into that picture window. I'm just lining up one of the creases in the cowling actually onto the horizon, which is a method that I tend to employ in real life. Coming up to our rollout point, bank balance, back pressure comes off. Remember to push off that back pressure. It's quite easy to go into a climb, as I have a little bit there. And reset your cruise RPM as well. So yeah, exactly how I'd expect the airplane to steep turn. Relatively minimal amounts of back pressure required, but the aircraft does feel kind of heavy, and does require a bit of effort to keep its altitude. Very, very stable though. It's not trying to sort of wobble itself into a higher roll attitude. It's all pretty much as benign as the stall is, really, and that's what you're looking for with the PA-28. It's just such a well-behaved little aeroplane. Okay, so let's set route back to our destination, the wonderful Nottingham Tollerton. Now, I mean, I could just follow the river all the way back there, but what I want to do is demonstrate to you how you can use this lovely GTN 750 and the aircraft's autopilot to achieve a nice comfy cruise performance. So let's get the power bumped up a touch, set that a bit low, and let's center that heading bug. I'm going to turn the autopilot on, put her in heading mode, and that's it. The autopilot is in charge of the aeroplane. Now, the autopilot works exactly the same as the Arrow's autopilot works. So those of you familiar with the Arrow from Just Flight know that the autopilot only controls the aeroplane in one axis, and that is the roll axis. It doesn't maintain altitude. So how I'm maintaining altitude here is I'm just getting the aeroplane trimmed out properly. So I'm just adjusting my trim a little bit as we speed up here. Now, there is an altitude hold cheat mode thing, which is that little circular white button just there. However, I'm not employing that because we're going for full realism today, and the real autopilot doesn't have an altitude hold, so I shall not be using that. But if you do want to use that, that's perfectly fine. That's right there. Let's pop the fuel pump off now because we finished our crazy general handling maneuvers. And let's put a route in the GPS. So let's go for, hit the DTO button, select waypoint EGBN for Nottingham, so I identified it there, enter, and activate. That's looking good. CDR into GPS mode, and then what we can do is just hit nav on there. Or can we? Is it good as a nav? Maybe it isn't. It's not actually outputting it onto there. So go to nav. It's getting a signal from the Doncaster ILS still. However, GPS isn't outputting for whatever reason. Probably a little bit of a bug then. Might be something to do with the new Microsoft Flight Simulator patch. But never mind, we can use heading mode and we can just steer the aeroplane onto the magenta line. That's no real issue. Now in real life I'd be avoiding RAF Syerston, which is the place just on the nose, like the plague, because it is a glider. It's just down there, because it's a glider base for the RAF. So the RAF do lots of recreational gliding out of there. So likely to get a glider towed into your face if you're flying through the overhead. But hey, like I said, we're on our own in the simulator today. So we're up at 3,000 feet. We've got 2,000 feet to lose to Nottingham, and we've got 9 miles to lose it in. So it's going to be about 6 miles that we need to get rid of an extra 2,000 feet, plus an extra couple miles to get down in time for entering the ATZ. So I'm going to start our descent at 8 miles, and hopefully we've got a little distance countdown on our GPS screen here. And we can be doing our pre-joining checks as we do that. So fuel is on, so full pump on and sufficient, and let's look at the time. Well, we'll stay on this tank for about another 4 minutes. It is still the fullest one at the moment. Radio, so I'll be setting up Doncaster, Nottingham radio in here, so In fact, for the sake of realism, let's do it. So 134880 transfer. So we could have a chat to Nottingham Radio using that. Engine T's and P's, all good. Quick glass carpy, make sure we're not getting any ice. And mixture full rich. Altimeter set air fuel QNH or QFE if that's what you want to fly on, but it's all 1013 today and DI, so let's check our DI. 230 there or thereabouts, and 230 there or thereabouts on there. So it's looking good, and we've already passed 8 miles because I'm an idiot, so let's chop the power back to about 2000 as that's a nice gentle rate of descent. Autopilot's still managing the heading, so I'm just pulling the power back and letting the aircraft pitch down naturally. Very little yoke input required, really, if you just control your rate of descent using the throttle. I can see Nottingham, it's just over there, so I'm going to get our GTN into OBS mode and set runway heading. So runway heading is going to be 270, so you always use runway 27. It's essentially a nil wind scenario here. Oh, it's not working. Gutted. Well, I guess I can't cheat with the centre line then, for whatever reason. I guess this new patch is causing all sorts of little issues with various different mods and devices. I should have expected as much. We're just coming into the edge of the ATZ now. We're passing 2,000 feet, so descent is looking okay. We're aiming for the water sports centre just here to finish the rest of our descent off. So essentially what I'm doing is joining on the dead side of Nottingham. The live side is the side whereby the circuit is conducted. So it's a left-hand circuit, runway 27, so over that side is the live side. This is the dead side, so this is usually where everybody sort of stages themselves, positions themselves for joins. So our circuit detail is going to be one approach with full flap, one approach flapless, and a glide approach to land. So we'll see how we get on with those. I'm going to pop the autopilot off now. I'm going to set the heading bug onto 270 just to give me some indication of runway heading. I'm going to level off at about 1100 feet. Now, what I usually say to people when they're learning to fly the Warrior, when they're transitioning from the Warrior to, or from something smaller to a Warrior, something like a Cessna 152 or a Tomahawk, usually tell them to keep the power back a little bit in the circuit, to keep it flying at about 90 knots rather than 110, just to give themselves a little bit more thinking room. And because they're probably used to flying around a circuit at 90 knots, given that that's the cruising speed of Cessna 152/150 and Tomahawk as well. Depending, of course, on how absolutely knackered the particular example they're used to flying is. Most of them are extremely knackered. So we're coming into the circuit now on a bit of a crosswind leg. Got Tolleton Village just in front of us there. Speed's looking okay. Altitude's looking about where I want it. So we're flying, it's an 800-foot circuit here at Nottingham, 150-foot elevation, so I want to be sort of about 1,000 feet, give or take, for circuits on the QNH. I'm going to start my turn onto downwind now. 30-degree angler bank turn. Keep these turns relatively nice and tight. And sort sort of point ourselves at Cockgreave Village on the downwind leg, and we'll do our checks now. So brakes are pressurised, parking brake is off, undercarriage is fixed, mixture's full rich, mags are on both, fuel is on sufficient, flaps, in fact, yeah, let's change tanks now. Flaps, speed below 110, flaps 1, instruments are all good, carpeets, we will stick on, hatches and harnesses are all secure, and the landing light can now come on. And just before Cockgreave, we're going to start our turn onto base leg. And as we're coming around the corner here, I'm going to start to back the throttle up and just start allowing the aircraft to descend. Go flaps 2 as well as we're coming around here. For a nice square base leg, letting the speed come back to about sort of 85, 90 knots. And generally we want an approach speed of about 75 knots, coming over the numbers at between 70 and 65. It is a very floaty aeroplane, this, so you may want to sort of bring the speed back to 65 if you're on a relatively short runway. Runway here at Nottingham is not too bad, although I've overshot the lineup completely. And that's full flap, and carpet can come off now. Speed's coming back, so 70 as we come into the last sort of third of the approach, adding a bit of nose up trim, all very nice and stable and benign. It's coming into the flare. And just hold it there. Don't be tempted to try and push the nose down as a lot of people are with PA-28s. Just let it float. And flaps up, full power. There's 60. And pitch for the bomb. So yeah, pretty spot on what I'd expect to find this aeroplane in the circuits in real life. Really straightforward little aeroplane, not too many things, pitfalls that you can fall into. It's just the floatiness, like the natural floating tendency of this aeroplane that can potentially catch you out. So next time around is going to be a flapless approach, so we're not going to have that extra drag from the flaps on the next one, so that does take a bit of forethought to get the aircraft in the right place energy wise for the approach. Chances are I'm going to end up high and or fast for this one, but we'll see. So we're back at 1,000 feet. Pull the power back, and brakes pressurised, undercarriage fixed, mixtures full rich, mags are on both, fuel's on and sufficient, flaps not required for a flapless approach. Instruments are all in the green, carpeets on, hatches and harnesses secure, and the landing light is on from the last time around, so we're all good on that front. Where's our runway? Yeah, looking good. Maintaining about 90 knots, which is nice. Start the turn, I'm pretty much going to chop the throttle all the way off in the turn here and allow the aircraft to start descending. Let the speed come back a little bit if I can. It doesn't go down and slow down all that well. It's a bit like an airliner really in that sense. All of you A320 and 737 jockeys will be well used to this. A little bit of power, just a little bit though, very sort of liberal application of the throttle, or judicious application should I say, not liberal. Liberal would be the opposite. Okay, there's final approach track established. I'm all the way off the power now, it's pretty much a glide approach. I'm getting rid of the carb heat now. So 80 knots, yeah, is good for a flapless approach. Looking a little bit fast. Let's try a little bit of a slip. Drag her up a bit. There we go, that's better. Now this is going to be a bit floaty, I think, but we'll do it for the interest of science. Well, there we go, full power. Straight back up again. So as you saw there, a very good demonstration of how much this aircraft can float if you let it. Of course I did that on purpose, and I absolutely did not muff my approach speed up. So we've got one more to do, or one more to survive, should it be, and that is the glide approach to land. Now, those of you familiar with my Arrow reviews, or familiar with the Arrow in real life, will know that the Arrow is absolutely ballistic. When you put the gear and the flap down, it drops like an absolute stone. The Warrior couldn't be more different. It's very, very floaty. It's quite efficient in the glide. So, whereas that floatiness is your enemy, when you're doing a flapless approach, it's actually your best mate when you are without an engine. So quite reassuring in that sense. Back up to 1,000 feet. Just let the aircraft accelerate. And we'll do our checks. Brakes pressurised, undercarriage fixed, mixtures full rich, mags are on both. Fuel insufficient, flaps not required just yet. Instruments are all good, car heats can come on. Hatches and RS secure, landing lights still on, and there's our runway. Okay, glide approach time, so kill the throttle, set the glide. It's a 73 knot glide on this aeroplane, so about there I guess, and we'll start turning towards the runway. Hopefully we'll be able to see the runway soon. Alright, aeroplane, shut up, I'm nowhere near the stall. It's complaining at me because I'm putting a bit of, being a little bit jerky on the pitch application. Now, you can see I'm turning directly towards the numbers here. Probably don't really need to, honestly, with the glide performance of this plane, but I'd rather be a little bit too high than too low. I can get rid of height, but I can't get it back, at least when I'm in a glide. So we're looking good there. I'm going to stick the first stage of flaps out. I'm also going to get rid of that carb heat. We're going to go for the second stage, and now let's get all of it in and pitch the aircraft to maintain best glide as we approach. Line her up with the centre line, a bit of rudder. Way back up she goes. It just shows how much energy we've still got in the aeroplane. That'll do. So, even with my ham-fisted mitts at the controls, we're able to pull off a pretty convincing glide approach there, which is absolutely what you expect from a PA-28. It is a very friendly, very forgiving aeroplane. Okay, runway vacated. Let's do our after landing checks. Pretty straightforward in the PA-28. It's just a flow through the cockpit. So set our 1200 RPM. We'll check trim, neutral. Flaps can come up. Fuel pump, landing lights, anti-coal and pitot heat can all come off. Transponder can go to standby. And that is our after landing check complete. Now we can just park her up and we can discuss what we think of this airplane. Okay, so here we are parked up on the ground at Nottingham, and it's just about time, I think, for my conclusion towards this aeroplane. Now, I've got my list of notes in front of me, and we're going to do positives and then negatives, which is exactly what we usually do if I can speak over the top of these extremely loud vans and pickup trucks going past. So, we'll start off with the positives, of course, and we're going to go straight in there with the detailed external model. In my opinion, the external model of this aeroplane is very, very good. As I said in the hangar, everything is exactly where it needs to be. All the rivets are exactly in the right place, without spinning this around too quickly. And the fidelity of the textures are extremely good as well. Now, are they quite as good as the Coronado aeroplanes and the default aeroplanes? Maybe not quite, but they're very, very close. And certainly the closest that Just Flight have gotten in any of their aeroplanes so far. I do think they are a step forward from the Arrow textures. So very, very nice external model. Fantastic work with the accuracy of everything. It's a real rivet counters aeroplane, and the textures are very, very good as well. And there's a lovely bit of weathering on the aeroplanes, as I showed you in the hangar, those bits of dirt coming out from behind this part of the cowling here. Really typical of what the Warrior has in real life in general, really. Okay, so I did say I was going to use my drone camera and show you that notation, so I'll do that now. Okay, so we're right up against the front of the aeroplane in the far closer than you'd ever get normally when you're just playing Flight Simulator, unless you're really into this sort of stuff. You really want to count all the rivets. But as you can see, look, that warning and placard, let's call it a placard, is very nice and clear, very easy to read. You can get very close here and look into the engine cowling. You can actually see the front of the first of one of the cylinders here, so you can see the cooling fins on the cylinder, and the same over this side. You can see it over here. So really, really detailed and very good textures. And you can see, get under here, and you can see all the panels and the pitot head here, and the stall warner here, and little eyelets for tying the aircraft down. Sorry, very, very detailed. You can even see the little aerial underneath the aeroplane here, which I believe is for the VOR, for the nav radios under here. So yeah, fantastic job that they've done with the aircraft, and a real positive. And of course, we can't mention the acuity of the, or the quality, should I say, of the exterior model without mentioning the interior model as well. It's very, very good. It's all custom made for this aeroplane, but I think there are a few little carryovers from the other Just Flight aeroplanes, but for the most part this is all custom made. Certainly the panel is absolutely stunning, as with most Just Flight aeroplanes, and at the end of the day the panel is the thing you're going to be staring at the most with an add-on aircraft for a flight simulator. So making the panel absolutely spot on should really be a priority, and Just Flight have got that bang on. As you can see, everything is weathered up in here too. We've got loads of grass and stuff on the floor, which is very typical of an aeroplane, certainly a flying school aeroplane, which people kind of drag dirt in on their feet when they're getting in and out of it. Lots of passengers and lots of students, lots of filthy flying instructors getting in and out of the aeroplane. So this is really sort of a typical look for one of these aeroplanes. You can see the bit of the paint sort of flaked off over the years on this sort of thin aluminium, almost, I'm not going to say foil, it's thicker than foil, but it's very thin aluminium that covers this little centre, almost sort of torque tunnel type thing in the middle of the aeroplane. I don't know what the proper name for it is. And you can see that the paint is sort of flaked off over the years, probably from people's feet kicking against it, which is really typical. So yeah, fantastic job with the textures. The next positive I've got is the system steps. So the quality of the systems in the aeroplane is very, very high, as you would expect from a Just Flight aeroplane. Everything in here is clickable, everything works, and everything pretty much works as it should do. Now, I showed you the fact that the ADF doesn't quite sort of park on the wing where it should do. That is a shortcoming that does need to be corrected, so hopefully they'll get on that at some point. But everything else is absolutely spot on in here. Also, you've got the depths of systems from the iPad, so you've got the things like the state saving, so the panel will save itself in whatever state that you've left it when you last flew the aeroplane, as long as you got the panel state saving turned on, and you can come back to the aeroplane, get back in it, and everything will be like you left it. So it's just like you've got out of the aeroplane, you've gone for a meal or something, you come back, you get in, and everything's as you left it, and you're off to go fly again, which is really good. It's great for immersion. And it's also great because it saves the wear and tear on the aircraft. So if you're sort of really abusing this airplane, flying it overly lean, flying it too high RPM for too long a time, it will start to wear the engine out, and you can eventually cause the engine to fail. You can also cause the engine to fail by using all the oil up and not refilling it. So you can see we're down to 7.9 quarts. We started at 8. So it is actually reducing the amount of oil in the airplane. Most light aircraft will burn a certain amount of oil as they're just through normal operation. It's just how they're designed to operate. So you do need to sort of top them up now and again. It's a very, very important part of the pre-flight checks is you always check the oil level. And the oil in this airplane does reduce, just as it would in real life, and you have to be in charge of refilling that when it gets too low. The battery you can flatten the battery, so if you sat for too long with the electrics on, with the engine not running, the battery will flatten, and all your electrical stuff will go off, and you need to hit the recharge button here. So that's very, very good. The co-pilot, obviously, you can put our friend in the seat here. Hello. And it's not just a visual thing. As you can see, when you put him in, the airplane sort of sags down as his weight is added to the weight and balance of the airplane. So very, very in-depth there too. You've got little things like auto fuel selection and stuff like that. The fuel system in the aircraft properly modelled. You also have a system which means you have to properly prime the airplane and use the correct starting procedure, otherwise it won't start on you. You also have to crank the engine for a certain amount of time before it will fire, and all of these sorts of things just add that layer of realism which make it really, really immersive. So I really enjoy all that kind of stuff. So the system's depth is very, very nice. Now this is probably the biggest upside for me, and probably most of the people watching this channel. The flight model of the aircraft is absolutely excellent. You saw that it sat pretty much bang on the numbers that we wanted for the climb and for the cruise. It handles pretty much bang on how I remember a PA-28 handling, and I mean the last time I flew one was 2 or 3 weeks ago, but as far as I can remember, it pretty much handles exactly like the real one does. It's pretty heavy in pitch, it's fairly responsive in roll, it is quite stable. It sits in the turn with the same amount of back pressure, certainly the steep turn. The 30-degree angle bank turns, I don't know, they seemed like they required a little bit more back pressure than I perhaps was expecting, but I don't know, it could just be my control setup, it could just be my own sort of muscle memory failing me a little bit. I don't know. I'm not going to pull them up too much about that, but for the most part, the flight model is absolutely brilliant. They've got the floatiness of it absolutely spot on as you're coming into land. As soon as you get into the ground effect, you start to get the ground effect and the thermals coming off the tarmac and friction layer and all that kind of stuff acting on the aeroplane. It starts to float down the runway even with the flaps deployed, which is exactly what the real aeroplane does. Please, if you've got this aeroplane, go out and try landing on a short grass runway. I can guarantee you that it is nowhere near as scary as doing it in real life, because as soon as you get down into the friction layer and you can see the hedge at the other end of the runway coming up on you, it does get quite sweaty. And I can guarantee that I have there'll be plenty of real world pilots, including myself, who've been faced with that situation before in one of these aeroplanes. And now you can experience it in Flight Simulator. Lucky you. Now the next thing I've got down here is the sounds. I mean, this is a Just Flight staple at this point. The sound model is absolutely bang on. The sound of the aeroplane outside and inside, and not just the sound, the engine sounds, all of the other sounds as well are absolutely spot on too. The switches all have their own unique sounds which are recorded from the real aeroplane, and I mean, I can honestly say that these really do sound like that when you're flicking around. The fan makes a noise. It's just, it's had so much care and attention put into it, and you can really tell when you look at the sound model and the depth of the sound engineering, for want of a better word, that's gone into this aeroplane. So fantastic, top marks for the sounds. I've also put down here, now this is a bit of a contentious point, perhaps you may not agree with this one, but I've put down that it's a good subject matter for Just Flight to be modelling. I mean, this is an aeroplane which a lot of people are going to be learning to fly in right now, and a lot of people are going to be very, very thankful that somebody is offering this for Flight Simulator so they can jump in and practice stuff that they've gone out and done with their instructor in real life. Obviously, we've got the default Cessna 172 and 152 and the Aerobat and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. But this is so much more in-depth than those aeroplanes and so much more useful as a training aid than those aeroplanes are, just because of all the systems depth and the realism that has gone into this one. So if you're a student pilot training in a PA-28, this is all your prayers answered, basically. So fantastic, fantastic for those sorts of people, and you know, great for Just Flight to model this this aeroplane before perhaps some of the more kind of exotic stuff. Sometimes, you know, what you want in a flight simulator aircraft isn't a really exotic, really exciting aeroplane like, I don't know, SR-71 or something like that, because I mean, who's flown an SR-71 in real life? About 50 people max are still out there who've flown an SR-71. I don't know, I'm probably wrong, but something like that. Whereas, how many people have flown a PA-28? Tens and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. So this is going to really appeal to a lot of people. I've also put down that the documentation is absolutely spot on, as usual. Go into the root folder in your add-on communities folder, find this airplane and look for the documentation, and there is an awful lot in there. There's basically most of the pilot's operating handbook has been included with this airplane, so spot on. Plus you've also got the brilliant included checklist, which you can click on the different bits and bobs and it will highlight up in blue, just like it does for the default aeroplanes, for most of the items anyway, not all of them. Which is really, really handy if you're not familiar with the cockpit layout of this aeroplane, as, you know, if you're a student pilot, maybe that's the case. And the final thing I've got as a positive is Just Flight, as usual, are running a discount on this aeroplane. So if you've got any of their other products, if you've got this aeroplane for, I think it's out for P3D, maybe X-Plane, not sure. If you've got it for any other platform, you can get it for Microsoft Flight Simulator for 25% off. If you've got the Arrow, then you can get 25% off this aircraft as well. So great discount program going on. It's $41 for the full price, or 30 British pounds in my sort of money. It's I don't know, it's in my opinion, for the amount of depth that has gone into this airplane, £30 is about where I'd expect it to be. However, you may think, you know, it's just a simple SCP, it's maybe a little bit expensive. But for me personally, I think that's about right, really. I think that's fair to ask for £30 for an aircraft which has as much care and attention put into it as this one obviously has. Okay, so some negatives. I'm just going to start off with the usual gripe that I'm basically putting out there on behalf of others. It's not really something that I personally feel. However, I do believe that some people aren't going to find the textures quite as good as perhaps they could be. Obviously, if you're going to get real close, some of them are a little bit fuzzy, and it's my favorite place, looking up at the roof. You can see that this is a little bit sort of last gen. It's a little bit P3D, not Microsoft Flight Simulator standard. So, I mean, I suppose you could pull them up over that, but like I said in the hangar, they do this to help frame rates for people with less capable systems. Now, maybe they'll offer something in the future where they'll do the entire aeroplane in full, absolutely pin-sharp 4K textures or something, and you can then sort of choose your graphic options to turn it down. I don't know. I don't know if that's even something that you can do in this flight simulator. But for now, I'm very satisfied with sacrificing a tiny bit of texture fidelity to make this aeroplane more widely available to people on all sorts of different systems. So, not something that I really care about that much, but you may do. Next thing I've got down here is a bit of a personal one, really, but it's the honeycomb issue. So the fact that I can't use my honeycomb mag switch with this aeroplane. I know that quite a few of you out there have got honeycomb yokes. It is a brilliant device for controlling home flight simulators. Unfortunately, you do have to sort of turn that off and disable it. Also, the avionics switch over here is something that you can't operate with the avionics switch on your honeycomb. I'm clicking mine on and off now, and it's not doing anything to the switch over here. That switch also is very awkwardly placed, and it doesn't light up blue on the in-game checklist. So it makes it very easy to miss this thing. Now, when I was doing my preview video, you know, those of you who have watched that will know that I was completely confused. I could not find the avionics switch, and I ended up using the emergency one here instead, which is obviously not normal procedures. So just a PSA, the avionics switch is right here, and you do have to click it in the cockpit. You can't use a key binding for that. The final one that I've got really is a negative, apart from things that are really, really sort of nitpicky. I mean, I'd say, okay, let's do some nitpicks. The carburetor heat needs to have a little bit more of a drop, I would say. With the ambient conditions that we've got today, I would expect between 50 and maybe even as much as 100. Certainly on a hot day, we'd get about 100 RPM drop, and the engine may be sounding a little bit more rough than it does when you check it on the ground. Not quite enough dropping RPM, sorry, when you engage the carb heat. If you want to be really nitpicky, it's missing the little stud, which is up here somewhere, for holding the baggage door open. So as much as I was praising the external model and the accuracy of it, it should have a little sticky out stud up here. I'm being really nitpicky here, aren't I? But hey, you know, I'm just playing devil's advocate for you guys. So that's it, really. I mean, that's about as nitpicky as I want to be. I don't want to go too much into that, but for the most part, I mean, there's just very, very small issues. The final thing I've got down here is that some of you might be thinking, well, it's just another PA-28. I've already got the Arrow. Why on earth would I want this? And, you know, good question. If I was in the market for another flight simulator add-on, and I've already got the Arrow, I personally would not really bother with this aeroplane. I tend to fly around in Flight Simulator, just have a bit of fun and relax. And when I fly a Flight Simulator aeroplane, I want it to be interesting and a little bit more sort of in-depth and complex. And certainly this aeroplane is quite simple, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's an ab initio trainer. It's an aircraft that a lot of people start their flying careers, their entire life with aviation starts in this aeroplane. You don't want it to be too complicated. So as such, you know, you can learn this aeroplane in flight sim pretty quickly, and that might just mean that you get bored of this aeroplane a little bit quickly. The Arrows certainly have a little bit more depth to them. They're faster, they're more powerful, they can fly higher. You can do a wider range of flights with them just because of the extra power and performance that they have. Certainly the turbos obviously can go way, way higher than this can. And they pretty much, obviously the turbo, I mean, if you've watched my Turbo Arrow video, you know all about, I've preached for hours about the takeoff performance of certainly the Turbo Arrow 4. But for the most part, the takeoff and landing performance is the same, so you can get it in and out of the same airstrips as you can this one. But, you know, like I said earlier, you might be a student pilot, and this might be the aeroplane you're learning to fly in, and in which case, this is absolutely perfect for you. So it's just going to be a personal, completely subjective thing. You might think, oh, it's just another PA-28, or you might think, fantastic, this is the PA-28 I was after from the start. Here comes my credit card. So that's it. I'm going to shut up now. That's all of my notes. For a sort of final conclusion, I think this is an absolutely fantastic rendition of this aeroplane. It is more of the same from Just Flight, with a slightly better external model than the other two aeroplanes that have come out so far, but a slightly more simple aeroplane. So if you're in the market for a PA-28, search around no more. You now have one for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and it is very, very good. Now, with all that said, please, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. We're going to have some more videos along the lines of this one coming along in the coming weeks and months. And I guess I'll see you next time. Thank you, and goodbye.